Should you start Joe Mixon in week number 4? And the answer is you're probably going to stream running backs over him. We saw Drome Ford really struggle on the ground in week 3. Yes, he had 2 touchdowns, but he was not efficient on the ground. And Joe Mixon is never the model of efficiency, even though he does get the volume. This season, 13, 13, and 19 carries. He's leading the Bengals in rushes. And he's also still involved in the passing game, 11 targets through 3 games, averaging over 3 targets per game, almost 4 targets per game. But the problem is he's still not efficient. 4 yards a carry. And if the season were to end today, he would have his worst yards per route run of his career. So Mixon, we'd already seen kind of slow down a little bit. And he'll continue to get the volume, which is why he's a running back too. But there's not a lot special about this matchup in week 4 against the Tennessee Titans. Sure, he'll get volume, but we haven't seen Joe Mixon get more than 65 rushing yards in any game so far. And so there's not a lot of reason for optimism or reasons to think that he could have boom week, even with Joe Burrow struggling. If Joe Burrow struggles, that means the entire offense struggles. So if Burrow is able to take another step forward, healing from the calf injury and re-aggravation that he suffered in week 2, then maybe we see a little bit better efficiency from Joe Mixon, more goal line opportunities. But other than that, I'm not super optimistic about Joe Mixon delivering on an upside week. This is probably going to be a running back 2 week based on volume, especially if he falls into the end zone. We're looking for like 15 for 60 with half a touchdown possibility. So 9 points there, sprinkling a couple more in the receiving game. We're looking at 11, 12 fantasy points for Joe Mixon. If you're happy with that, so be it. But there may be higher upside swing running backs in that RB2 tier that could be a better consideration for week number 4. Joe Mixon is a start for most leagues, but if you have other flex consideration like Drome Ford, you can consider Drome Ford over Joe Mixon for week number 4. Joe Burrow is also a bench this week. We're not optimistic about what he's done so far in the 3 games that Burrow has played. Right, he's at about 40 passes per game, only 55% completion, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, the second lowest yards per attempt. And we've seen T. Higgins struggle. Jamar Chase finally had a big game in week 3, but it seems like Joe Burrow can only sustain 1 pass catcher in this offense until he gets things right. I mean, Joe Burrow, looking at what he's done, this season, his adjusted completion percentage is 3rd worst, only behind Jordan Love and Kenny Pickett. So we've really seen him struggle. And his NFL passer rating is 2nd worst, only to Zach Wilson. So Burrow has mightily struggled. We need to see him take a step forward before we put him into our fantasy lineups, because it's the injury that's limiting him, especially because he's trying to drive the ball down the field and it is not happening accurately. It's not happening well. So Burrow is a bench for this week. You can consider starting Matthew Stafford over him. You can consider starting, of course, Anthony Richardson over him, Russell Wilson over him, Brock Purdy over him, Kirk Cousins over him, Daniel Jones. You would still start Joe Burrow over Daniel Jones. But that's, I think, the line of demarcation, because Jones has also mightily struggled this season. And has the turnovers, where Burrow, he has 2 picks, but Daniel Jones has 4 picks plus all of the fumbling issues. So I think that's the line of demarcation for me for week number 4 for Joe Burrow. I hope he gets healthy. I hope he, has a boom week here in week number 4. But unfortunately, that's not how we're reading it against Tennessee. The over-under now is down to 40.5 in favor of the Bengals on the road, but still it's not looking great. So maybe 20 points, maybe he throws a touchdown, and maybe Mixon gets a rushing touchdown. kick a couple field goals, but there's not a lot of optimism that this game can become a shootout. As a result, we want to be lowering Joe Burrow in our fantasy lineups and consider streaming over Joe Burrow here in week number 4 until we see that he is right and healthy. Yeah, you're finding ways to get Amari Cooper into your fantasy lineup. 15.8 fantasy points per game. That's 17th among wide receivers. He's returning on the ADP, the late 3rd, early 4th round ADP. That's fine. But right now, yeah, he's projected for my fantasy points as 18th among wide receivers, and his PFF receiving grade on the season is great, 79.8. He's got a great matchup this week, wide receiver cornerback matchup in Cleveland's game against Baltimore Ravens. Remember, the Ravens would normally have a really strong defense, but they've been decimated by injuries. And so Cleveland at home, yes, DeShaun Watson may still be dealing with a shoulder injury, but he's good. He's supposed to be good to go. That means you're firing up Amari Cooper as a boom bust high-end wide receiver too. And Amari Cooper struggles in the outdoors, but it's not winter time yet. And so it's the fall. Amari Cooper can still play in this, and we're firing him up as a wide receiver too for week number 4. We like the matchup. We like what Amari Cooper has done so far, playing through the groin injury that he suffered and performing. So we're going to roll out Amari Cooper with a high level of confidence for week number 4. He's a top 20 wide receiver going into this matchup again. Drome Ford is a top 20 running back for me this week. Ford, remember, is taking over as the lead back for the Cleveland Browns in the absence of Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb, who underwent successful MCL surgery, and they're now preparing to have Chubb undergo the ACL surgery as well here in a few days. According to the timeline, Chubb can return sometime in the middle of the 2024 season. So in the meantime, Drome Ford is going to be holding the reins on the season. 3.9 yards per attempt, 67.8 PFF rush grade, but Drome Ford has the second highest yards after contact per attempt in the league, only behind Christian McCaffrey. And looking at what he's done this year, 14.9 fantasy points per game. That's good for 14th on the season. Right now, Drome Ford is projected to be RB21 on the week. So pretty good back end of RB2 status. I think that's fine. He'll get the volume. And in this matchup against Baltimore, I don't know if Cleveland is going to be ultra aggressive in passing a ton, given that David Njoku is dealing with his burn injury. He's officially questionable, but expected to play. And so it's going to be Amari Cooper. It's going to be Drome Ford. And there's not really much else. David Njoku is getting some love, but it's going to be consolidated to those players. I mean, Donovan Peoples-Jones isn't getting the love. Elijah Moore is getting a lot of targets, but not turning those into fantasy points. Kareem Hunt was questionable this week. And so it's clear that the top 2 position players, Drome Ford and Amari Cooper, they're good to go. All of the rest, it's stretching it. So fire up Drome Ford as a mid-pack RB2 for week number 4. DeShaun Watson is a mid-pack quarterback too, entering week number 4 against the Baltimore Ravens. Yes, the Ravens are banged up. Their defense is, but so is DeShaun Watson. So I don't anticipate the Cleveland Browns being ultra aggressive outside of their top 2 playmakers. That is Amari Cooper and Drome Ford. Could other players get sprinkled in? Could Elijah Moore break off one big play that can salvage it today? Absolutely. But DeShaun Watson is mid-pack pretty much in every single metric, whether it's PFF passing grade, whether it's completion percentage, big time throw rate, adjusted completion percentage, NFL passer rating, whatever metric you want to pull up for DeShaun Watson, he's like 13th to 23rd, somewhere in that range, which is an indication that he's playing meh, which is what we can describe the Browns offense as. Is man, like, okay, fine. There's nothing special. Like DeShaun Watson has not shown us the special. aside from his rushing. Like his rushing will get us some fantasy points, bump him up just a little bit. But there's not a lot of optimism. There's only There's not a ton of pessimism. But the middleness of DeShaun Watson is why I think it's worth trying to take shots on higher upside plays for this week. Geno Smith, obviously you're starting over DeShaun Watson. You're starting who's another one? Trevor Lawrence over DeShaun Watson this week. You're starting Dak Prescott over DeShaun Watson this week. Heck, why don't we try to start CJ Stroud? Stroud has played tremendously through the first 3 weeks, averaging almost 300 passing yards per game. He has the connection with his wide receiver, so consider Stroud over DeShaun Watson this week. Maybe it's a tilting take, but at this point, right, you don't want to be taking shots on players that are just going to give you a middle-of-the-road performance. CJ Stroud has given us some very nice performances. 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, averaging over 300 passing yards per game for CJ Stroud. 906 passing yards for CJ Stroud compared to 678. That's over 220 differential in passing yardage. Nearly 10 fantasy points just right there. 9-10 fantasy points right there. So consider playing CJ Stroud over DeShaun Watson this week, with DeShaun Watson dealing with the injury, the offense, playing against Baltimore. Things can get a little haywire there. So I'm not looking to be plugging in DeShaun Watson into my lineup with any level of optimism. He'll probably give you top 18, top 16 quarterback performance for this week, but we shouldn't have much more optimism than that. If we only cared about targets, Elijah Moore would be the answer to our questions. But Elijah Moore is getting targets, but he's not doing anything with them. Moore has 23 targets on the season and only 128 yards, about 5 yards per target. That's not getting it done. His PFF receiving grade is 63.9, only slightly better than what he was doing last year with the New York Jets. Something has significantly shifted from his rookie season when Elijah Moore, 73.8 PFF receiving grade. Elijah Moore, 1.75 yards per route run then. But now Moore is dealing with a 1.25. Very low, very disappointing. And yes, Elijah Moore is playing 44, 38 pass snaps. Like, he's getting out there. He's running routes. 92, 93% of his snaps he's running routes on. So if he's out there, he's probably going and getting a route, and he's just not being graded well, and he's not delivering for fantasy. He's not eclipsed 50 yards receiving in any of the 3 games so far. And now we've got the Baltimore Ravens, who, yes, they have a banged up defense, but DeShaun Watson is dealing with the shoulder injury, and I think it's going to be consolidated to Amari Cooper and Drome Ford in tomorrow's game. So Elijah Moore, he may still get some targets, but we don't have reason to believe that he can do much more with them based on the data that we've received. He's running the routes, right? He's playing the snaps. He's getting the targets even, but he's done nothing with it. So it's really frustrating for us fantasy managers who've been putting him in there. We're seeing the targets happen, and he's just done nothing. So consider taking more upside swings. Consider DJ Chark over Elijah Moore this week. DJ Chark has a higher upside, significantly higher upside than Elijah Moore for this week. Could DJ Chark bust too? Absolutely. But what we are looking at for Elijah Moore is 9 targets. He caught all 9 of them in week 3 against Tennessee, only 49 yards. Extremely disappointing. Until we see Elijah Moore elevate his gameplay and not just earn targets, he needs to elevate his gameplay before we are putting him into our fantasy lineups. We like some of the ancillary metrics of the target share and his route running and all of that, but his PFF receiving grade He's not graded well. He's not delivering for fantasy. Until he does so consistently, he needs to stay on your bench. You're firing up CeeDee Lamb as a wide receiver 1 this week. Lamb is poised to have a big-time game. Yes, he's kind of disappointed a little bit relative to his ADP. Lamb was being drafted as a top 10 wide receiver in the offseason. Now he's at wide receiver 18 fantasy points, 15.7 on the season. He's projected this week for over 16 fantasy points as wide receiver 7. So I think he returns on that, and he's in a good position. His wide receiver cornerback matchup is great this week. And his PFF receiving grade has been great this year as well, 77.9. We're very happy with that. Yes, he had a tough game against Arizona, only 4 catches, 53 yards. And he's yet to score this season, but we are happy with seeing a spike week, for instance, in week 2 against the New York Jets, 11 for 143. Lamb lighting up the Jets, who are prone to shut down opposing number 1 wide receivers. Lamb operating significantly out of the slot this season, 75% of the time. That would be his highest rate of slot snaps since his rookie season. So CeeDee Lamb, moved to the slot because Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup are playing on the outside. I don't think that this is going to be a worry about CeeDee Lamb returning top 10 wide receiver weeks. It's just a matter of, is this week going to be a spike week? And against New England, there's a good matchup. And I think that the Dallas is favored significantly in this game. We should be seeing a big-time game from CeeDee Lamb. Fire him up as a wide receiver 1 this week. Don't get cute. Don't get worried about the Arizona game. Everything was fluky there. Move forward, move on, play CeeDee Lamb with confidence. I know. Brandon Cooks disappointed in week number 3, but we're looking to week number 4. We're moving past it because there were reasons why Brandon Cooks was struggling. It's the first week back from the MCL injury, and he just wasn't. It wasn't right. But still, 7 targets. You can't argue with 7 targets from Brandon Cooks. He's going to be a 20 to 22% target share guy, and in a game where Dallas is favored, and they want to get right against a New England Patriots team that is a good matchup for opposing wide receivers, Brandon Cooks is going to do a lot more, and I think that this is going to be an opportunity for Brandon Cooks to have a boom game. So I view him as a top 36 wide receiver, a flex consideration, and I think this is a bounce-back week for him. He's another week removed from the MCL injury that he missed for week number 2 and then had a tough game in week number 3. I think we'll see a resurgent Brandon Cooks in week number 4. Fire him up as a flex play, and I think it's going to be all good for Dallas. Rising tides lift all boats, and this is going to be the case for Brandon Cooks week 4. Consider him as a flex play. All right, what are we going to do with Michael Gallup? Who is the real Michael Gallup? Can the real Michael Gallup please stand up? Because from weeks 1 and 2, Gallup only had 13 combined receiving yards on 4 combined targets. 2 for 4 for 13 yards in the first 2 games. So he was a fade going into week 3. But boy, I hope you didn't fade him because he caught 6 passes for 92 yards on 7 targets. So he matched Brandon Cooks in targets on the outside. And that's Michael Gallup's MO. He is an outside wide receiver, 6'1", 198, 4.5 speed, just a long-armed wide receiver who can come down with some of these big plays. And the New England Patriots are a great matchup for the Dallas Cowboys, wide receivers in particular on the outside. So fire up Michael Gallup as a wide receiver 4, a deep league flex play or a second flex. He's got the boom potential. We saw it last week against Arizona. We've seen it in previous seasons. So Michael Gallup is one of those players that we can have a little bit more optimism in your deeper leagues of putting him into your lineup and seeing what we can get out of Michael Gallup in this positive matchup. The good game environment, the over-under for this game for the New England Patriots Dallas Cowboys game is 43.5, and the Cowboys are favored by 6.5 now. So Fire up Michael Gallup as a wide receiver 4 and a deep league flex consideration for week number 4. Finally, we saw what we needed to see from Jerry Jeudy. You have my permission to put Jeudy back into your fantasy lineups. We need to see a game like this. I know it was a blowout. It was 70-20, but we needed to see Jerry Jeudy get right. And 5 for 81. He didn't score in week number 3, but working his way back from being out from week 1, still played over and ran 90+% of his routes versus snaps. He's playing mostly in the slot. So we have to like what Jerry Jeudy did in week number 3, 5 for 81, big yards per reception type of player. And if this game gets into another one of those ugly matches, which it very well could be, both defenses for Chicago and Denver are banged up significantly at multiple positions. So Judy's probably going to get room to operate and hit up with Russell Wilson. So fire up Jeudy as a top 24 wide receiver right now. Jerry Jeudy is wide receiver 28 in projected points. He's wide receiver 49 in fantasy points per game on the season. So I think low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. But I think we want to find ways to get Jerry Jeudy into our lineup, even though the projected points are a little lower. I think this is an opportunity for Jeudy to continue that momentum of working his way back from injury, earning targets, getting shots down the field, and doing enough to keep Marvin Mims off the field. But maybe Mims will still work his way in no matter what. But fire up your Jerry Jeudy for week number 4 against an ailing Chicago Bears defense, arguably the worst defense in the NFL. And that's in light of Denver giving up 70 points. I still think Chicago is a worse defense. Fire up Jerry Jeudy in week number 4. You see, the sneaky thing about Courtland Sutton is he's actually like, okay, he's decent. He's decent enough to be holding off Marvin Mims. Mims is a wrecking ball right now in fantasy. He's getting 28, 30% of snaps and is getting 15 fantasy points per game. Like, this is wild stuff for Marvin Mims. But Courtland Sutton is playing on the outside 75% of the time. And his PFF receiving grade at 70.1 is respectable. It's enough to keep him on the field. And we saw in the blowout game against Miami, 8 for 91 and a touchdown for Sutton. But it wasn't the first time that Sutton caught a touchdown. Back in week 1, 4 for 32, and the score has made Courtland Sutton an interesting flex play. Even in week 2, when he didn't score, 5 for 66. So a 1.77 yards per out run isn't great, but it's not disastrous, okay? It's not what T. Higgins, for instance, has been putting up. It's not what Kyle Pitts or Drake London have been putting up. So Courtland Sutton will be just fine. And in fact, this is in line with pretty much what he's done over the last 4 seasons, the 70.1 PFF receiving grade. Last year, 69.7, 71, and 71.9. So Courtland Sutton is who he is, an unspectacular high-end wide receiver 3. But he's had a couple boom weeks already. He's wide receiver 22 on the season in fantasy points per game. He is projected to be the wide receiver 30 this week. And has a neutral matchup, and so relative to other wide receivers, you have to like Sutton, though, maybe breaking off a big one or getting another touchdown. It's clear that Russell Wilson is looking his way in the red zone, 2 touchdowns so far. And if this game gets ugly into an ugly no defense shootout type of deal, Courtland Sutton is bound to score, and that's what we want is pieces of this game, because we think that the offenses are going to be good enough to take advantage of the really bad defenses and the ailing defenses. So Courtland Sutton is a high-end wide receiver 3 start this week, very much in the flex consideration realm. So consider putting Courtland Sutton into your fantasy lineup, given what he's done, given his matchup, and given what you may need. And you may need a flex play and exposure to this Denver-Chicago game. You want to hear something wild? Let me tell you something wild. Tyreek Hill is second in the NFL in fantasy points per snap at 1.04 among wide receivers. There's only one player in the NFL that is higher, and that's Marvin Mims Jr. And he is a full 900ths of a fantasy point above Tyreek Hill, because Marvin Mims is doing it all over the place. He just had a 99-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. He's hitting on these massive spike plays, 50-yard receptions, 60-yard receptions for touchdowns. And he's just coming down with it. And so it's a matter of, is Marvin Mims going to be getting more snaps? And I think he's inevitable. I think Marvin Mims is inevitable. But how inevitable is he? Is he going to be limited to 13 or 11 or 7 pass snaps like he has over the last 3 games? You'd hope not. You'd hope Sean Payton would come back to the drawing board and say, hey, we need to get this guy. You know how we traded up in the second round to get this wide receiver? Yeah, round 2, 4.38 speed. This wide receiver, Marvin Mims Jr. Now, there's something interesting about Marvin Mims. It was only Marvin Mims Jr. and Jameson Williams 2 years ago who were the wide receivers in college. There were only 2 of them. It was J-Mo and Marvin Mims, 20 yards per reception and above a 60% catch rate. It's wild. So they're catching balls down the field. They are making plays happen. Those are both speedy wide receivers, skinny, speedy wide receivers. We're able to come down with the ball, and Marvin Mims is definitely hitting. So we want to be in on Marvin Mims as a stash, but not a start yet. We are not seeing enough of the pass snaps to trust the volume that Marvin Mims is going to deliver. Remember, Marvin Mims has only 31 pass snaps this entire season. So while he's graded out really well, 83.2 PFF receiving grade, he has a 7.22 yards per route run, which is outrageous. We still need to be waiting. We want him on our team. We don't want to start him yet, so that when he is ready, he is on our team and not on our league mates. So go ahead, pick up Marvin Mims off of waivers. He's bound to be a boom wide receiver 2 in future weeks, but not certain about week number 4 for Marvin Mims as a start. I'm not confident in Mims given his volume. So we've gotten 3 weeks out of Javante Williams so far, and there's been nothing really impressive about what he's done. Hasn't exceeded 52 rushing yards. His PFF receiving rate is 56.2. His yards after contact per attempt is mediocre at 2.36. There's not a lot of wow factor from Javante Williams, and this isn't surprising. He's still working his way back from the ACL injury he suffered last year. So I know that we wanted Javante Williams to be a thing. He's just not a thing. He has 10 targets through 3 games. Fine, he's getting a little bit of involvement in the passing game. That's fine. But 1.2 yards per out run isn't anything to run home about. There's nothing exciting about Javante Williams, and it's because we knew this. We knew this when we drafted him, or maybe you didn't draft him. Javante Williams was working his way back from the ACL tear, and that's going to affect his efficiency and effectiveness. Right now, Javante is 31st among running backs in fantasy points per game, only 8.7. He's got a good matchup against Chicago. I don't know if I could get any higher than about running back 24 for him. I know that we have high projections for this matchup against Chicago, where both defenses, Denver and the Bears, are missing significant pieces. So don't get too excited about Javante. He's probably going to bust for you. He may fall in the end zone to salvage his day, but that's the way he's going to pay off. Is he hasn't scored a touchdown yet. If he gets 60 yards, 15 for 60 and a touchdown, and sprinkle in a couple more points, we might be able to get to 14 fantasy points, which would pay off, right? It would pay off a top 20 or so running back. But if that's like the ceiling, if that's best case outcome, I mean, yikes. To be fair, the Bears defense has made everyone look good. The Bears defense has made Aaron Jones the RB1 overall in fantasy points per game. In 2/3 of the game, they made Rachaad White look like a mid-pack, high-end running back too. Like the Bears have given up. And look what Kansas City did to them. They had their way, with Jerick McKinnon scoring 2 touchdowns. So yes, there is a pathway for Javante Williams to be a running back, mid-pack running back too, something he hasn't been this year, but we should also not get carried away because Williams is not very good right now because he's still nursing the injury, and it's okay. We just need to temper expectations. So if you want to take an upside swing, you think that, Javante will fall in the end zone twice because it's against the Bears, so be it. But I think that Denver wants to rack up points. They want to give it to the next team over, right? I mean, think about it. You just got embarrassed 70-20. And you're just going to run the ball and grind the clock with Javante Williams? No, they're going to air it out a lot. I think that there's going to be some points manufactured by Russell Wilson and the rest of the Broncos. They've got a chip on their shoulder. Sean Payton got embarrassed. Look, the Denver Broncos are going to want to push the ball, and I think that that's not going to happen with Javante Williams. So let's not get carried away. Javante Williams is not necessarily a must start. He is a possible start. He's an upside matchup type of running back right now. So let's value him as that. Probably running back 24 or so is the appropriate ranking for Javante Williams for this week. It's kind of bizarre what happened in week 3 to Nico Collins. Collins was absolutely crushing in weeks 1 and 2, 11 and 9 targets, 69 and 90.8 PFF receiving grades in those games. 80 and 140 receiving yards and a touchdown in week number 2. His yards per route run, 2.05 and 3.65, very good for individual games. But in week 3, Collins only played about 60% of the snaps. He only caught 2 passes for 34 yards. And yes, Houston was up pretty big on Jacksonville. Jacksonville was imploding bizarrely. So maybe that attributes a little bit to Nico Collins. Maybe he is dealing with some injury that we're not notified about or that he's keeping to himself. Regardless, Nico Collins is a mid-pack wide receiver 3 for me. And given what we've seen from the blow-up games he had against Baltimore and against Jacksonville, we want to be pushing Nico Collins into our lineups as a flex consideration. You should not feel bad putting Collins into your lineup. He's wide receiver 19 on the season, 15.7 fantasy points per game. And he has a decent enough matchup, wide receiver cornerback wise. So 2.52 yards per route run on the season is pretty good. We like that. So fire up Nico Collins as a flex play in week number 4. Tank Dell has done nothing but prove that he should be in your starting lineup. I mean, look over the last 2 games. 7 for 72 and a touchdown. And 5 for 145 and a touchdown. Tank Dell, he's a full-time player, playing mostly out wide. He's 5'8", 165, and he's winning on the outside. That's what's wild, is that Dell is open. He's able to make people miss. He was a 3rd-round pick right out of Houston. And not fast either. 4.49 is not – almost 4.5 for a 5'8", 165 guy is not getting it done. So Tank Dell, he's a must start at this point. Why would we move away from Tank Dell in week 4? There's no reason to. So don't. Don't move away from Tank Dell. Put him into your lineup. He's the real deal. 77.5 PFF receiving grade. 2.61 yards per route run on the season, and his average depth of target was 18.4 in week number 3 against Jacksonville. So he's getting shots down the field. He's getting big-time plays. He can make it happen. He's good enough. 5'8", 165 on the outside, and he's winning. You only win on the outside if you're good, and it's even better that he's only 5'8". He's not a big guy. He's a tiny little guy. Tank Dell is deceiving, not with the name. He's going to crush. Week number 4, fire him up as a flex play. You'll be happy about it. He is the wide receiver 14 on the season in fantasy points per game. He's being projected at only 33, at wide receiver 33 in projected points. But I know his wide receiver cornerback matchup is tough, but Tank Dell is going to play on the outside, and he's going to play well. So I would expect a decent enough game from Tank Dell, flex level, fire him up, play him with confidence. He'll have a good game. Start Tank Dell.